I thought it was a curious comment considering I'd been working on ribosomes ever since I was a postdoc, or over 20 years at that point. It was clear that even before the structure was actually solved, politics had begun to infect the race. Our submission to Nature was sent to the usual 3 anonymous reviewers. One of them was Steve Harrison, who was excited enough about the manuscript that he not only gave us detailed suggestions on how to improve it, but disclosed his name. Some of his comments were a little paternalistic, like crossing out a paragraph where we described the reasons for the breakthrough, saying, "Don't brag." Perhaps we had got a little carried away with our own success. Word had got around at the Denmark meeting that we had already submitted a paper to Nature on our results. Exactly as I had anticipated, this set off a mad scramble from the other labs to get their stories out around the same time. Soon afterwards, the Yale group submitted their story on the 50S to Nature also. The journal held ours so that the two could appear together. Although I was initially annoyed not to have our special unshared moment in the sun, in hindsight the 2 papers made a nice pair, one on each subunit. The papers made something of a splash, with news items about them in several journals. Harry too got busy, and soon afterwards submitted his paper on the entire 70S ribosome to Science. It isn't just scientists who are competitive, but journals are too. Science published his paper rather quickly, with a great deal of fanfare, including an accompanying piece on the ribosome race by a journalist, Elizabeth Panizzi. She had written a short piece on our Nature papers only a month earlier, in which she had mentioned Ada and Harry mainly in passing. This time she wanted to do a longer piece, and started talking to various people. I suggested that if she wanted to talk to someone outside the ribosome field who was respected, she could talk to Steve Harrison. Steve, however, thought Panizzi's treatment of Ada in her earlier piece was dismissive, and refused to talk to her further, saying she should talk to Ken Holmes, a famous biophysicist at a Max Planck Institute in Heidelberg. Ken had changed the world of biological structures forever by showing that the intense X-rays produced by synchrotrons, which were used mainly for high-energy particle physics, could be used for diffraction studies. He and Gerd Rosenbaum, who, when I met him a year later, struck me as a brilliant, if somewhat opinionated and eccentric specialist in X-ray optics and instrumentation, built the first X-ray diffraction beamline at the DESI synchrotron in Hamburg. This was the same synchrotron outside which the Max Planck Society had conveniently built a lab for Ada, and where she had collected much of her early data. Having watched Ada work on the problem for years, he was not entirely charitable to us. "She's done most of the back-breaking work," he was quoted as saying. "The others have jumped the gun. They should have left Ada in peace." I was shocked and dismayed. It confirmed my worst fears of how some would perceive our efforts. Luckily for us, most people were happy about the breakthroughs and very supportive. And just 2 years later, when I first had the chance to meet Ken in person, he was very friendly and complimentary about our work, and we have remained on good terms ever since. Panizzi's piece also quoted Joachim Frank, referring to me as the dark horse of the Denmark meeting. He had meant to be complimentary, implying I had come out of nowhere and surprised everyone. But coming in the same report as Ken's remarks, and not long after I'd heard about Harry's comments, I found myself irrationally annoyed by it, seeing it as yet another effort to belittle me as a Johnny-come-lately. Of course, since I had deliberately kept our efforts very quiet, because we were starting out from behind, I could hardly complain about the dark horse description. But it caused a lot of ribbing by my colleagues, including some joking references to my dark skin. One friend superimposed a picture of my face onto the head of a black horse, and said I could use it as a logo in the slides of my talks. Another idea was to shrink it down to the size of a dot on the corner of the slide and have it gradually grow in size as the slides progressed, so that it would become obvious as a horse's head only towards the end of the talk. An homage to the famous scene of Omar Sharif's entrance in David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia. Suddenly being thrust into the scientific limelight was a new and uncomfortable position for me. It was also a distraction I could not afford. The real deal, the complete atomic structure, was still ahead of us. Getting the first atomic structure of a ribosomal subunit would now be a flat-out race between Yale and us, or so I thought. After all, the 70S crystals were not of sufficient quality to yield an atomic structure, and Ada seemed to have been left behind. In any case, it was time to get back to work.